Hello, everybody. Kyle here. I am going to basically review the season of The Rings of Power. I haven't put out a couple of reviews to the last number of episodes, mainly because right now it's been such a um, mess of TV shows coming out where there's Andor, there's She-Hulk, there's Lord of the Rings, House of the Dragon. It's really hard to keep up with all of them to, make reviews every week. So I decided that I'm only going to do some of them, and then when all these shows end, most of them I will be doing a review of the entire show. So in the case of Rings of Power, I really liked the Rings of Power. I didn't stop doing reviews for the Rings of Power because I didn't like it. Unlike She-Hulk, when I'll put out a review for She-Hulk pretty soon. But with Lord of the Rings of Power, I think the season as a whole was pretty good. It had some great character moments, great character interactions, and Elrond, Durin, even the Harfoots, for instance, they were pretty fun characters to see, and I think the Harfoots were the most like Tolkien in how they were portrayed, and of course, very reminiscent of the Hobbits. But what I really loved about the Harfoots was how every time you watched the Harfoots, you were going on a journey with them because they would always be moving. And I think one of my biggest criticisms with The Rings of Power season 1 was that there were a period of episodes in this season, specifically near the beginning, where it didn't feel like characters were moving or going along a journey. It felt very much like, in the case of the Numenor episodes, they were stuck in a place. And I think that was one of my biggest critiques for the show, and especially with its pacing, because I feel like they could have maybe shortened the episode length, combined some episodes into others, for you to have more of a flow with where everyone was going. But I think that the main character of the Rings of Power is Galadriel. And I am glad to see that because when they announced all the cast members in the Rings of Power, I got a little worried, especially when they put out the posters for the Rings of Power, that it would be kind of hard to have a central figure for the show. And yes, Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, they have a lot of characters too, but in the Lord of the Rings, really the central character is Frodo, and the central character of The Hobbit is Bilbo. And you can say that Aragorn's also a central character in Lord of the Rings. But you really, I think, need for these TV shows a central character, a central number of characters. And in the case of Rings of Power, I think Galadriel was that central figure. And I thought that Morpeth Clark did a wonderful job. And she really captured, I think, the essence of Galadriel. And I love how her character did evolve through the season from, seeking Sauron in almost this vengeance way, and then her finally kind of seeing what the rest of the world was like. And then finally, at the end, when she confronts Sauron, she is at a different place than she was at the beginning of the season. And I did love the Sauron reveal, because I think that Halbrand, having them have Sauron with Galadriel the entire time and her not knowing it was pretty interesting. I've seen a lot of people say that, oh, Galadriel was dumb for not realizing this. But the whole point of Sauron is that he can change his shape and he can be unrecognizable to even the elves. So when he becomes Anatar, the elves don't recognize him. I can understand why Galadriel wouldn't be able to recognize him. And it says something towards evil in the world, where she's so dead set on a certain way that evil presents itself, but when it's right in front of her face, she's kind of blind to it. It's similar kind of thinking of like what happens with the Jedi when the Emperor Palpatine, Darth Sidious, is in their grasp right in front of them, and yet they don't even realize it. There also was an element to this show that I thought was really cool. I thought the score of this show by Bear McCreary was outstanding, almost far beyond what television has accomplished with score. If you listen to the soundtrack of this show, it sounds very much like any other film would. Reminds me of like Ramin Djawadi's work with Game of Thrones and how he was able to really craft television scores into something that went far beyond what you would expect from TV. There is also, I think, in this show a sense. So to keep in perspective, when going into the Rings of Power, I heard that this show has like the most action in any other show they've ever done. I think they probably meant the 5 seasons, because this season did not have as much action as I thought it would. I mean, that can be seen as a good thing, because I know a lot of Tolkien fans, especially Christopher Tolkien himself, were upset with how much action was in, the Lord of the Rings Peter Jackson films. So the fact that there wasn't as much action in this, I think, was a little bit more true to Tolkien than even the films were. However, when you say in interviews that there's going to be a lot of action in this show, and yet there isn't as much action in it, it did get boring at times. And I will say that the best episode for the show was episode 6, where we finally got to see this gigantic battle that was really well shot, choreographed. I did think it went a little bit too much into the gore, because Lord of the Rings, in my opinion, doesn't need gore. I feel like Lord of the Rings does more by kind of keeping a little bit of the violence at arm's length, where a character was stabbed or killed, but you don't need to see the blood. And I think that House of the Dragon has kind of done a better job when it isn't as violent as you would think at times. And I think that Rings of Power, at least in the battle sequence, there's a scene when this orc's eye is just gushing blood. And it's like, do we need that? Do we need to see Bronwyn, on a table with just blood spewing out of her body? It's sometimes felt a little bit too gratuitous. But I mean, aside from that, I think that the action was incredible. I really loved that one sequence when Arondir is fighting that one orc and he's just throwing him from one end of the field to the other end of the field, hitting the walls, and you can feel the impact. And I mean, I thought I had a lot of fun with the show, especially in the end of it, because at the end of it, you really started to see it connect to Lord of the Rings and with the Rings of Power. And the songs were so good. And I think that for a first season of television, I think it was good. I think that this might be one of those rare shows where the following seasons actually are better, because I think that there's a lot of room for improvement with this show. I think that season 1 is a good baseline. It's a good way to start. But I think that the following seasons, once we even get to know the characters more and we get even more action or more depth within the storyline, I think that's when it's going to get really, really good. But yeah, what did you think of Rings of Power? I know a lot of people don't like Rings of Power, but did you like Rings of Power? Do you not like Rings of Power? Let me know in the comments below, and thank you so much for watching this video. Take care. Bye.